Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Simon Burke, and I'm the General Manager for Policy and Government Relations at the ARA. I'd like to begin by firstly acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. For me, based here in Canberra, it's the Ngunnawal people, so I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Now, we've got another great session for you this afternoon as part of the ARA's webinar series, which is kindly sponsored by Frauscher. So on behalf of the ARA, I'd like to extend my sincere thanks to Frauscher for their ongoing support, which really does help make events like this possible. So thank you to Frauscher. Now, today we have the pleasure of being joined by Sue McCarrey, who I'm sure is a familiar face to many of you, as the CEO of the Office of the National Rail Safety Regulator. So Sue is joining us this afternoon to provide an update on ONRSR's current national priorities, some of their major projects and policy initiatives, and what that means for the industry. Now, just a quick reminder to everyone on the line, we will be having quite a bit of time for question and answers following Sue's presentation. So I'd really encourage you to take the opportunity to please post any questions that do come to mind over the course of Sue's presentation, just in that questions pane, which is in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. So yeah, encourage you to make use of that, and hopefully we can have a good discussion following Sue's presentation. Now, given the fact that I'm certain almost everyone joining us today will have either met Sue in person or virtually at some stage, or at the very least heard her speak at other events, I won't go through Sue's biography in any sort of great detail, other than to mention that Sue has now held the CEO role with ONRSR for almost 7 years, and she really has been the driving force behind much of the important work the regulator's been progressing on improving safety on rail networks across the country. So without any further ado, Sue, I will now hand over to you to run us through your presentation. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Simon, and I'm pleased you didn't go through a fairly long-winded introduction, because, as you say, I think I should know most people online, and thank you very much for everyone attending to get a bit of an update on where we're at as an organisation, and from our perspective, where we're at from a safety perspective across rail. And I wanted to cover off on a couple of areas today that are very much a priority for us, that we're out there looking at, and I think are a priority for a number of organisations as well. So thanks for joining us, and hopefully you'll get something out of it. I'm sure for some there will be a little bit of overlap and repeat, but hopefully it'll give you just a bit of an update as to where we're at. Okay, hopefully I can get it across. As I said, I'm going to go run through some of our priorities, the sorts of things that we're doing and what we're looking into, but also I'm going to run through some statistics as well, just to give you a bit of an update on where we're at statistically in relation to some of those rail safety areas. But I also wanted to give an update on some of the policy work we've been doing, and I think a number of you are aware, particularly around in-cab cameras and our cost recovery model and areas such as that. So I'll give you a bit of an update as to where we're at as an organisation, but also I wanted to talk about some specific projects that are underway which will impact many of you, and some of those you'll be aware of, some of them you may have been very much involved with along the way, but again, just to give you a bit of an update, because some of you may not have been as involved as others, so I'll give you a bit of an update on those as well. From our perspective, I think like everybody, we're dealing with COVID. We're dealing with sort of lockdown in Sydney and Melbourne, so we're probably not physically out on the system as much as what we normally are, but we are still working with operators online and following up and doing work via video conference and by phone, and if we need to, we will be out there. So we have, in most of the states, we track like you do, where we're exempt, and we can use authorised officer power, so that if we need to get out on the system, we're able to do so, and we're obviously tracking the sort of COVID rules as it goes. So as an organisation, that's affecting us like it's affecting everybody else, but what it's not affecting is our ability to be working with operators and including investigating incidents as they occur across the country as well, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. Okay, so just quickly on statistics. Now I'm picking up from the Rail Safety Report from December, end of December last year. We are literally just in the process of pulling together the statistics that will come out towards the end of the year. where we build up from end of June. So it'll be statistics as of the end of June this year. We then build into the National Rail Safety Report, which will be out before the end of the year and once again online so that everybody can have a look. But if you are wanting statistics before then, I just refer you to our website where we try to keep updated information on there that you can actually use for benchmarking. I know a lot of people use that and build it into their own systems internally so that they can have a look. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about rail-related fatalities. For these particular statistics, we all know that in the industry, the largest number of rail-related fatalities relate to trespass and obviously suicide on the rail system. And wherever possible, I know we and industry work with governments on trying to reduce that number. But I think it would be remiss of me not to mention that over the last 18 months, nearly coming up to a 2-year period, we have actually lost a number of train drivers on the system, and they are very much the subject of intense investigations by my investigations team, as it is, I'm sure, with the operators involved. But I think it's really important that we acknowledge that loss in the industry and that we need to make sure that we learn from those. And one of the areas that I think there will be a number of learnings that come out of a lot of our investigations, and we're trying to look for ways we share more of those. But can I please ask you to have a look at your safety management system? So you might have them updated and they're in writing or they're on your system, but if people aren't following those procedures out every day actually on the system, that's where we tend to see one of the biggest breakdowns in the system. Isn't the actual safety management system itself. That can be a very good piece of work based on good risk analysis. But then once you've done that, you need to be able to follow up to make sure that people actually out there on the system are following that safety management system and procedures that you've got in place. So it hasn't been a good year in Australia over the last couple of years in rail, and we want to make sure that we can get as much learning out of that as we can and actually improve across the industry. Having said that, Australia still holds a good safety record in rail, and I don't want to downplay that either. But I think everybody in rail would like to think that there's no unnecessary fatalities on our rail system, and that's what we aim towards. So these sort of statistics we track on a regular basis, as I'm sure organisations out there do as well. Look, running line derailments, this is probably an area in Australia, and most of our derailments do tend to be within the freight sector, but we do also get derailments on in-service passenger trains and from time to time in the light rail space as well. And it is an area that we do tend to, if we benchmark, for example, against the United Kingdom, we don't have a great record in these sort of derailments. We need to try and get this down so that we actually reduce the numbers of derailments on the system. And particularly in the passenger space, that's certainly an area that we watch very closely as an organisation so that we can reduce those in the area as well. I wanted to talk a little bit about SPADs, and these are statistics that do tend to go up and down in the industry. And I'll talk a bit more about the data strategy later because some of these definitions are changing a little bit. But the sort of SPADs that we tend to focus on are those that are the more severe SPADs. So as you can see here, these are what we call the SPAD, the A1s only. So these are the more serious type SPADs on our system. And so these are the ones that we follow very, very closely. And although you can see the sort of trend line goes up and down, we do from time to time get some not great periods of SPADs occurring, and particularly ones that are completely missed by the driver by a fair distance. Or one of the things we've seen in recent times are things like triple SPADs or quadruple SPADs, and they in particular is obviously a concern for us as a regulator, and as you can imagine, they are ones that we investigate very seriously as well and are likely to have sort of the more serious regulatory tools used. So please keep an eye on your SPAD statistics, not the whole. I think sometimes we get buried in statistics. Have a look at those more serious type SPADs and what is causing it. I think we sometimes just sort of look at it and say, well, if it's completely missed by driver, therefore driver wasn't watching. Well, what was actually leading to that? Look into what are all those potential causal factors that led up. In other words, rosters, fatigue, things that are actually distracting the driver, those types of things, rather than just assume that a mistake was made, because often there are things that lead into that type of incident occurring. And that's something that we obviously look at as part of our investigations as well. So I just wanted to cover off on a few of those. As I said, on our website, we have a copy of the last National Rail Safety Report, but we also put on there updated statistics that you can actually look into those, use them in your organisation to do some benchmarking, and we also provide some benchmarking data in there to help you, and in particular so that we give you some separate statistics around freight operations, heavy rail, passenger, light rail, tourist and heritage, so that you're actually doing your benchmarking on a like-for-like type operation, which I have been told is useful to organisations. I wanted to talk a little bit about our national priorities. Hopefully these don't come as any great surprise to anyone here, but what I like to do is give you a little bit of an update. And again, probably the first one, level crossing safety. There's some really good things happening across the industry in level crossing safety, but it's also another sobering one where we have in the last sort of 12 to 18 months had a number of serious incidents occurring at level crossings. In particular, we're focused on heavy vehicles as well. So we know that heavy vehicles, trucks, etc., out on the roads make up around 2% of road traffic, and yet they represent around 20% of level crossing incidents and accidents across Australia. So I've actually been doing a bit of work with the heavy vehicle regulator in this space, where we're working on a bit of an education campaign to get out to truck stops and things to actually try and push the messages in the right way and trying to use the right medium that heavy vehicle drivers will actually pick up. So that's why we're targeting things like truck stops across the country, where we can actually work with the heavy vehicle regulator to do that. We know that a lot of governments are putting a lot of effort into removing level crossings where they can, or at least upgrading level crossing protection. I think we'd all love to see on every level crossing across Australia, at the very least, boom gates and lights and bells, so an active crossing. But we also know the reality is we're a very big country. There are an awful lot of crossings across the country, so that's not always practicable to do that. But what we're also starting to focus a bit more on is train visibility. So that wonderful word in the rail industry, we use train conspicuity, and there are standards around that RSB have produced, and I know some operators use standards from elsewhere, either internationally or they develop their own internally. But we are actually out there at the moment, particularly in the freight sector, looking at those sorts of standards. What train visibility standards are you actually using as an operator, and are you following those? So, for example, we know that there is a lot of information in standards around colours of trains to give trains better visibility, what lighting should be used. And the other thing is, for things like lighting and reflector strips, if it's covered in dirt and trains are never cleaned, then obviously that has an impact on a train's visibility as well. So we've actually got rail safety officers out there at the moment looking at whether or not operators are actually following their own procedures and their own standards in this space. We've also instigated a bit of work with ACRI, asking ACRI to update some research on train visibility. It wasn't a case of we want them to just to start all over again, because there has been a lot of research done in this space. I was even involved many years ago in WA after the Jennicabine incident out there, where unfortunately 3 young people lost their lives around train visibility. So let's pick up on the research that's been done. Let's update that, see, are there some new technologies around that actually make train visibility easier to achieve, either here or internationally. So it's a little bit similar to the work done around track worker safety, if you are following that and you've seen the report produced by ACRI. Very similar type approach that we're using in relation to focusing specifically on train visibility for this piece of work. And I was really pleased that as soon as I raised doing that work with ACRI, immediately RSB, ARA and the Freight on Rail Group and TrackSafe all stepped up and said, no, we would like to be involved in that research as well. We think it's an excellent piece of research to do, and they're obviously very keen on the outcome. So look, it is an area that we're particularly focused on at the moment. One, because it is a priority, and I think for the rail industry, it's always going to be a priority. But two, because there have been a number of fatal rail crossing incidents, accidents over the last couple of years, which obviously we want to try and make sure we can prevent. The other thing we are doing with level crossing safety, if you haven't seen it, and we'll be showing you that in a moment, is to actually have a look at the level crossing portal. The National Level Crossing Committee, which is made up of governments, industry, TrackSafe and others, we're actually looking at how can we better share information with those decision makers who make decisions around level crossing safety and the level of protection. And that's how the portal was actually developed. And we offered the National Level Crossing Safety Committee that we had the build to be able to do that. So we had systems in place. And that's now been launched. So we conducted that work on behalf of that National Committee. And that particular portal has actually been launched. And I'm going to show you a little video in a moment about the level crossing portal and what it's all about. And we have had a huge number of organisations across Australia already signed up to the portal after we did the launch. And if you haven't seen it, please wait and have a look at this quick little video, and then you can go onto the website and actually sign up to use the portal. It is not a publicly available system on our website because it actually does hold information that you need to be able to make good investment decisions around level crossing safety. And therefore, depending on who you are as an operator, so if you are a track manager, so you're a RIM, so like ARTC will have access to their information through that portal, and rolling stock operators will have access to the information they need. We also have certain information at a high level available to associations like the ARA, but also we've got information available to the level crossing safety committees in each of the states, which are often involved in making recommendations to government. So it's a really good piece of work, and I'll show you a bit more about that in a moment. So look, just to move a bit further on level crossing safety, if I can get my thing to move down. Here we go. I seem to have jumped ahead onto track worker safety. So just as well, I can just play it by ear. So track worker safety, as you know, this has been a real focus for us and the industry over the last number of years. And in particular, trying to push not always the big bang approach, but what are those sort of modern technologies that are available. We always say wherever possible, people should not mix with trains. So wherever possible, they shouldn't be out there on the system while you've got a fully operating system, particularly in those high traffic sort of passenger networks. But we absolutely have to, what is the best form of protection that you can use to keep the people working on the system safe? One of probably the good things is you actually can see here in relation to track worker safety an ever such slight trending downwards in track work procedure rules and breaches. And again, these are the sort of high level type breaches. That is a good sign, and it's a good thing to see. We hope we continue to see that downward trend as we go forward, but I think it really has been picked up by industry, and I know companies are often wanting to share with us what they're doing in this space, but also willing to share with other rail operators around the country. And I think that's one of the really pleasing things that we see in relation to the priorities is companies pick them up, they're doing a lot of work, and they're happy to share that across the industry, which is just terrific. So let's hope that trend continues. Again, we want our people to be safe when they're out there working on the rail system. Look, level crossing safety, I've talked a bit about already, so I won't go into it in too much more detail, but you can see here particularly level crossing collisions with road vehicles. It tends to be, again, it's one of those statistics that is just up and down. And that's why when you look at the rate, it almost doesn't say much because it kind of just sits down there on the bottom. But it often depends on movement of vehicles out there on the road. One of the reasons, and before we get too excited, that overall you can see a reduction is because of COVID. During coronavirus sort of last year and this year with the lockdowns, because you have many less people on the roads, that's why we're actually seeing that reduction. So I don't think it's necessarily a major shift in safety. And as I said, one of the things we're seeing highly overrepresented are heavy vehicles. So look, I think now I probably would like to show you the level crossing portal, and I know the person who's helping us with this will actually take over and show the video for you.
Across Australia's vast national rail network, there are more than 23,000 level crossings. At many of these, there are interactions between rail operations, road traffic, cyclists and pedestrians almost every minute of every day. Every effort must be made to manage the safety risk at all of these crossings, so far as is reasonably practicable. Other than suicide and trespass, crashes at level crossings are the primary cause of railway-related fatalities among the general public. The National Level Crossing Portal is a new digital resource for rail safety stakeholders, designed to help decision makers in government and industry to make better informed safety investment and planning decisions. An initiative of the National Level Crossing Safety Committee, the NLXP as it will be known, has been developed following widespread consultation with rail safety stakeholders around Australia, as a way to meet their request for better information regarding level crossing data. It is capable of providing on-demand level crossing safety data at no cost through a self-serve online portal that draws together specific level crossing occurrence data with an agreed subset of ALCAM data. The portal comprises a series of predefined user-friendly reports in detail or aggregate form, and users can also download data for further analysis. The reports produced by the NLXP are interactive and available through users' existing Power BI licenses. A license will be provided if you don't have one already. To protect the integrity of the data, its use is governed by terms and conditions, and prospective users can register for access via the website nlxp.com.au. Access to the predefined reports is not automatic and will be approved by a single contact for each organisation. Currently, access to the NLXP reports will be available to rail infrastructure managers, rolling stock operators, rail industry associations, and both state and national level crossing committees.
Wonderful. Now, as I said, if you haven't had a chance to have a look at it yet and you haven't been involved in the portal, I'm just jumping back a few slides, please get onto our website and have a look for the link to the National Level Crossing website, and you can put in an application there to actually go online. We've had a huge amount of interest, and it is being accessed widely by operators and governments alike, as it is for associations. Now, as I said, your level of access depends on whether you're a RIM, a rolling stock operator, an association, or a government level crossing committee. So that's all been determined by the National Level Crossing Safety Committee. So look, just to touch very quickly on contractor management and control assurance. So contractor management is one where it's becoming even more of a focus around, and it has overlaps with all the other areas, particularly, you know, I know we constantly talk with the industry about skill shortages in the industry and then the quality of training that's available to rail safety workers. And this has a real impact around contractor management, where it's really important, where there's so much work going on in the industry, just handing over to a contractor, you need to be aware, is the contractor following your safety management system? You know, a lot of the time we'll sort of see where it's in the contract where it says, you're doing this under the operator's rail safety accreditation, so therefore you must follow the rail operator's safety management system, and nobody's checking on that. And they're actually just doing their own thing, because once they get out there on site on whatever it is. We've seen this in a number of really serious near misses, even overlapping with that level crossing area, where maintenance work being undertaken on level crossing equipment and things are literally just not plugged in properly at the end, and you suddenly have a level crossing that's reopened without being checked, and we get had some awful near misses in that space. So look, contractor management is so important, and I know it's not easy. As I said, we have a real sort of developing that skill shortage in the industry. We've got a lot of work going on, but don't forget that role of somebody whose job it is to be managing the contract and managing the team to ensure that they're actually following the safety management system that's in place. And control assurance is another one. We all, we do it internally as part of our own risk management, where we're looking at, we have all these controls in place, and it's because of those controls that we're actually saying that this risk has been reduced to so far as is reasonably practicable. Well, that's great as long as those controls are actually being followed and they're working. So, you know, a big part of our own internal audit program is based on our controls that we've set are in place to check, are people actually implementing the controls, or have we just got it listed on a risk management system on a spreadsheet somewhere, but nobody's actually following them and using it. If we're saying that that control's in place and it reduces our risk, then we really need to make sure that we're actually following them. I wanted to mention, I mentioned at the beginning that it has been a sobering couple of years in rail. And you can just see there we've had a number of serious incidents. The first three, Wallen, Jumperkine and Westwood, all resulted in the loss of lives in the rail industry. And Dumbarton, although it did not, it very nearly could have. So obviously it's not, I mean, as a regulator, we don't talk openly about individual investigations, except to say that they are serious incidents. We take them seriously, and the investigations are incredibly thorough in this space, as they should be, and as is required of us as a regulator, particularly where we've seen loss of life in the industry. Where we can, we do try to make sure that all rail operators across the country can get as much learnings out of that as possible. We won't necessarily be open about this particular learning comes from that incident. But when we do talk generally with rail industry about learnings that are coming out from investigations, etc., it is because we are doing thorough investigations into a whole range of serious incidents that we're able to share those learnings with you. So, policy. I'm sure you're, well, a number of you are probably waiting to see where in-cab cameras are at. We are still working on the in-cab camera policy. It is still me. I'm putting up a proposal, for those who aren't aware, to ministers from me as the regulator to say I believe it is time in Australia that we looked at compulsory cameras in rail cabs for mainline operations for freight and passenger heavy rail trains. Now, there are a lot of restrictions around that, and I think sometimes people forget restrictions are already in place in both the Rail Safety National Law and the law that what's called the Transport Safety Investigator, the TSI Act, that ATSB work under. There are a lot of protections in there that it's not just open slather with who has access to and who can use the footage from these cameras, and then what's appropriate for the use of that footage. There are a lot of restrictions in place in the law, as there are now for things like data loggers and the recorded radio communications. Those same protections will be afforded to in-cab cameras. They become another train safety recording device under the law. But I think there are some companies who have gone down this path already, and I think one of the key lessons we're learning out of the consultation we're doing around this is the need that if operators are using CCTV, the need to obviously negotiate with staff and employees about how footage is actually used. But from my perspective, the ability to be able to use footage for those serious safety investigations after a notifiable occurrence, so it's actually stepped out as far as how we see the policy coming about, is after a notifiable occurrence. If there is an investigation by ourselves, ATSB, state police and coroners, they're sort of the standard external agencies that we have access to that footage. It is not about live viewing while people are out there or driving the trains. That is not the intent of this at all, and we've made that very, very clear. It's around some strict requirements to be able to use it for the purposes of safety investigations. So ministers, it's still going through that ministerial process. It's for ministers to approve that change based on the recommendation that I make to them. The other one is the cost recovery model, which some of you may have been heavily involved with because you've been working closely with us on that. And so some of you have probably heard a lot about it, others not so much. This is when we were asked by ministers to develop a new cost recovery model for the regulator, mainly because we are still using a cost recovery model that is the state-based systems literally bolted together. Now, that's not how we operate as an organisation. We operate nationally and we use our resources nationally, depending on, it is, to me, it's not very efficient and it's high cost to have signalling engineers sitting in every single state and territory in case we need them. So we don't. We actually have a team of specialists who we use across the country when we need to. So because we work nationally, it makes sense for the cost recovery model to be national. But the other side of it is they said they wanted the cost recovery model to be based on risk and regulatory effort, which makes perfect logical sense. But of course, it takes a lot to build a model around that, which we've now done. And ministers have agreed in principle on that. And we have been out there talking now more closely one-on-one with rail operators or groups of rail operators in relation to what that model looks like and exactly what the impact is on their organisation. COVID's got in the way a little bit. We haven't been able to get into Sydney and Melbourne yet because it is the sort of thing, it is too difficult to do it by video conference because you're literally working through models, statistics and spreadsheets. As soon as those restrictions lift, we will be into Sydney and Melbourne to talk with operators. But as a result of that, we've recommended back to ministers and governments, and we've had no disagreement at all around this, is we've said, look, rather than introduce the cost recovery model on the 1st of July 2022, which was the original plan, particularly with the hold up with COVID and being able to get out there and have these conversations, and because the data strategy, the new data collection will come in place, we hope 1st of July next year, and we need time for that to bed in. We're actually recommending that the new cost recovery go back to the 1st of July 2023. That's also in response, I know a lot of the industry feedback was, can you give us a bit more time? So I think that kind of suits both sides. It gives us more time to get out, and we are trialling a few of the elements of that cost recovery model around the assessing the safety maturity of an organisation and the technology maturity of an organisation. And we're out there looking for volunteers adding up to actually trial parts of that cost recovery model. So having that extra 12 months, I think suits everybody. And governments have been quite on board with that in all the conversations that we've had. It is a good model, but whenever you change a cost recovery model, and particularly because it's going national, it's 100% cost recovery, which means there isn't the sort of government funding coming into the model. It has an impact on operators. For some, it will be a positive impact. For many, it will be a negative impact. And that's what we've been out there talking to them about. What governments did agree in May this year, when they agreed to the model in principle, and although it seems like a small step, it took a lot of work. Governments have actually agreed to cover the cost of regulating the tourist and heritage industry across Australia. Now, that is actually a huge step forward. I think they see the benefit of the tourist and heritage industry, particularly to regional tourism, when, of course, the restrictions are lifted and we actually get back to sort of full operating mode. There is a real advantage to sort of regional communities around the tourist and heritage sector. So the governments have agreed to actually fund that part of the regulatory model. Now that accounts to around $4.9 million in our model, which is quite a substantial decision for governments to make. It also means that technically it's no longer 100% cost recovery from industry because governments have agreed to actually fund that part of it. Now, I could talk for another 2 hours on cost recovery. I won't, because a lot of you are sick and tired of hearing me talk about it. But I promise as soon as the borders lift, we'll be into Sydney and Melbourne, and we'll be putting back those consultation sessions around the cost recovery model that we had in place before. So projects. National Data Strategy is one that's a bit further ahead timeline-wise. That is one that we've worked in partnership with the ARA with, and I think it's been a really great look for the first time ever, because you couldn't do it when you had 7 regulators. We've said, if we could throw out and start again, what is the data that we need to actually regulate rail safety? What is it that industry might need to use? and we've been able to literally start again from that. So the revised data set that we're collecting, that will go to ministers in early December this year, and we hope then the regulations will then go through to change, ready for the 1st of July next year. People in your organisations who deal with data, we've been out there talking to you. Andreas from our team has been out there talking to a lot of your members, so that hopefully people are across what those changes are and what's coming in relation to the National Data Strategy. But look, there are some, we get clogged up with a lot of data that is not needed and doesn't really impact on the work we do as a rail safety regulator. I quite often use the example of when a massive freight train out in parts of regional Australia hits livestock or hits an animal. I'm an animal lover, so it's not great for the animal. But if it hasn't done any kind of safety damage to the train, why would you need to report that to the regulator? And at the moment, you do need to. So that's an example of the sorts of things we're changing, and there are others. So, for example, security assaults on train stations or in and around train stations, police will generally pick those up and deal with those sorts of incidents. So although they might be trend data that we follow, it's not necessarily something that we need to know immediately. It's more your police and local police service that does. So they're the sorts of things that we've been working through in relation to National Data Strategy. Look, regulating 2025, as we're about to hit 2022, I probably should call it regulating 2025 and beyond. Look, we are constantly internally as an organisation looking at where is the future of the industry going. My senior leadership group, we actually, which is all of my executive and all of their direct reports from across the country, met last week, and we invited Caroline Wilkie as CEO of ARA to come and talk to what's the direction the industry's taken. It's really important for us to keep across that. How might regulation look? Is it going to be different? Do we need to staff differently internally as a regulator? So we're constantly looking into the future in relation to that. One of the things I think we've generally shown is the law as it was drafted holds up pretty well because it's risk-based and because it allows some innovation in the industry, it actually holds up pretty well to that. But it is something that we're constantly doing as an organisation internally. Look, some of you'll see this is probably what I'd call now a soft launch, I think is the title that we often call it. We are actually doing a little bit of a rebranding internally. Just a bit of a refresh for those of you who remember off the top of your head our brand of the crosses and what have you. And one of the reasons why that was developed at the time as ONRSR was being developed is because it was about bringing together the states and territory regulatory officers. It was about bringing together as an organisation where was state and officers being pulled together. Some were working under a service level agreement. So that logo and everything was designed about where the ONRSR was at the time. Whereas now we are a national regulator. I talk to many people who haven't been in the rail industry long enough to know what it was like to have 7 state-based regulators, etc. Not to say we should ever lose that memory as an industry, but I think we are now a national regulator. We are independent, more so than perhaps ever in the past for some of the state-based regulators. We do try to be facilitated to find the right safety outcome with industry. Doesn't mean as a regulator we won't use the powers that we have when necessary. We will. We're a lot more streamlined. We are a finished product now. We're not still trying to roll states in. And we've become more and more known as ONRSR. Please don't use ONRSR. I know some people use it, but we've become known as ONRSR. It's not often that people will use that full Office of the National Rail Safety Regulator, which is the legislative title, and it will always be there, as you can see on the logo. But what we've tried to do is just start to do a little bit of a branding refresh. So you'll start to see that a bit more. So consider that our very, very soft launch as an organisation. I mentioned COVID-19 at the top, so I'm not going to say too much more about it. We are an essential service. We, like anything as an organisation, are very much encouraging our people to be vaccinated. I have to say it's not been a hard sell internally. I think already around 90 to 95% of our team are either fully vaccinated or they're on the way to being. We, like everybody else, are tracking the health orders in place around where it is going to be compulsory to be vaccinated. We've seen changes in relation to authorised officers in Victoria. We know about the changes in the construction industry if we're out there working with our rail operators who are doing major constructions. So we're tracking all that internally, and we are very aware that we are required to follow those same rules. And we've also seen the WA government making some announcements around the Pilbara, and the operators in the Pilbara are going to use compulsory vaccination, one, because it's good for their system and for their staff, but also because of to protect the Aboriginal community, because the Pilbara operators are very high employment base for the local community. So look, we're following all those. As a regulator, we want to make sure that we are following the rules appropriately. So please be assured that we're following all of those changes as well. As always, there's a lot more further information on our website. ONRSR Engage, I think, has been slightly tweaked and updated. I think it's still probably one of the most downloaded parts of the website. But as is the statistics I talked about earlier, if you're wanting to do some comparison, but also now very popular is the level crossing portal for those wanting to get on there. But look, that's all I was going to cover to start with, Simon, because I did want to leave time for questions. I'm hoping there've been some questions come through as I've been talking.
Thank you so much, Sue, for the presentation. And look, you've covered a lot of really important issues there. And even for someone like me who deals with ONRSR quite regularly, I've learned a few things today, which is great. Now, there have been a few questions come in, which is great to see. But just a reminder to everyone on the line, you can still submit those questions through the questions pane on the right-hand side of your screen there through the attendee control panel. So encourage you to do that. But look, I might get things started with a quick question around the National Data Strategy, Sue. And as you mentioned, that's obviously been a joint initiative between the ARA and ONRSR, and one I've been involved in for a little over 12 months or so now. And look, from my perspective, I'd agree. I think this project has been a great example of the regulator and the industry coming together to achieve a common goal in what I think has been a genuinely collaborative manner. And I think the end product is really something that will provide a much better set of safety data, which will obviously be more accurate, more timely, more consistent across the country. But look, I'm just interested from the regulator perspective, once we start to collect a few years worth of this new national data set, what are some of the big benefits you're hoping to realise from an ONRSR perspective in terms of being able to get some insights from that data?
Yeah, thanks, Simon. Look, I think from our perspective, what it will do is there are a couple of areas where it is actually some new information that we're collecting, which particularly will help the cost recovery model and things like that. But look, I think part of it for us is the data will be more targeted. For those who don't know, if we look at all of our Category A and Category B incidents across Australia, we collect around 44,000 a year. That is a huge amount of data when there is a reasonable percentage of that is just not useful. As I said, hitting animals out as trains are crossing the Nullarbor. So there is a lot of information there, but in a shift to what we haven't let go of is the really important safety data that we need to collect. And what it will also do is help to focus more down on some of those causal factors, which we know are the ones that could have led to something more serious. So it is a much more targeted set of data. So when we talk about it will reduce regulatory burden, it's because we're reducing the amount of unnecessary administrative reporting, but focusing more on that specific rail safety data that we actually need and use as a regulator, and hopefully we can feed back. What we also hope to do, Simon, is for those of you who have seen the level crossing portal, is I think that shows that what can be achieved with feeding that information back to the rail industry, to governments, to people in those areas of decision making, where they can use that information. So rather than having it collected, and yes, we can use it and we can talk to individual operators about what's happening, to be able to make it more widely available for people, for industry, for operators, has to be an advantage to help make better decisions when it comes to rail safety. That's what I think will be one of those really good outcomes. Now, that's not going to be achieved, as you said, 1st of July next year. that is that sort of next phase once we actually bring the data in. But I'm hoping too that when people see the benefits of the level crossing portal, they'll see, wow, we can take this to the next level using the new data set.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, look, I think it's a great initiative, and I agree. I think it's going to give us some much better insights moving forward, both from an industry and a regulator perspective. I've had a question come in around SPAD. So you obviously touched on that in your presentation, and mentioned over the last kind of 5 years, we've seen that number kind of hover up and down, but kind of remain relatively steady in terms of there hasn't been a significant downward trend of any description. Is there anything from your perspective that we could be doing to help drive those SPAD incidents in a little bit more of a downward trajectory? And had someone on the line mention whether we should be considering things like automation or AI in the cab a little bit more seriously when we're looking into the years ahead.
Look, not so much about AI, but certainly probably a few things. I would love to say, let's put full automatic train protection right across every rail system in Australia. Fairly cost prohibitive. Certainly, I know a lot of the bigger passenger operators are heading down that path, whether it be ATP or ETCS or one of those. And a number of the freight operators are. We all know ARTC is working on ATMS and other operators using different systems. So, and look, of course, I won't sort of cover under the line of interoperability, but those sort of systems are really important in modern railways to be able to prevent. What that is doing is helping to prevent the SPAD having serious consequences. It won't necessarily prevent the SPAD, but it will actually stop that serious consequence. So I think that's one side, is wherever possible to be investing in those sort of new technologies needs to continue to be the focus for the rail industry. And it also has productivity benefits as well. My job is to sit here and say this is really good for safety, but all of those systems I just mentioned allows closer headways. It actually allows much better productivity out of your rail system, so it has that dual benefit. But the other side of it too is, can I please ask that particularly those SPADs that tend to be human error related, so as the higher risk type SPAD I'm talking about now, not so much just the signal that restores in the face just before the driver takes off. I'm talking about the higher risk ones. The best thing you can do as an operator is investigate them properly, and do so with an open mind, of not with the sort of pointing fingers, oh, it's the driver's fault, just missed the signal. No, have a look at it. Really look at what caused this SPAD to occur, including the human factor or human error side of it, and what led to that human error. Now, sometimes it is purely human error on the day. They were distracted by something. Or is there personal mobile phone use going on in the cab? Or was the driver fatigued? Because the shifts back to back were just to the point. And fatigue isn't, we're not just talking about falling asleep here. Fatigue is also about distraction, because, the rosters have been too sort of back to back and there wasn't enough downtime in between. Look at all of the things that can lead to a SPAD with an open mind and deal with those, as opposed to the quick and dirty, oh, driver just missed the signal, we'll sack the driver, let's move on. Not saying that might not be an appropriate outcome at times, but I think we need to look at these and investigate them properly. Is there a system issue as well that's helping lead to this? Or is it purely behaviour on the day? As I said, that we do know very small percentage, a bit of personal mobile phone use. That should not be occurring while they're in charge of a train. So, investigate it properly and then follow up on that investigation to try and prevent it happening again would be the other thing I would request. Yeah,
fantastic. So questions are starting to roll in thick and fast now.
Okay.
We'll just see what we can get through. No, not at all. So I've had one around, the significant introduction of new technology that's coming into the into the rail industry. And it's obviously becoming a much more complex operating environment where people still need to interact safely and effectively with that new technology and new systems. And I guess the question is more around whether ONRSR's considering on emphasising that human factors integration piece, which I believe is a requirement under the legislation a little bit more as we start to see more of this tech come online.
Absolutely, and a really good question. So yes, you can look at the end state of once the new technology is in, and it will often give a safer system. But it's not just plug it in and switch it on. That human interaction and things change as a result of a new technology. It means that your operating procedures change. What kind of human factor impact might that actually have? So yes, we have a couple of staff internally, but unfortunately one of our good human factor specialists got nabbed by, well, not nabbed by the NAB, but by the Commonwealth Bank in looking at their human error in banking. So look, what we do is look at, particularly around that new technology spaces, have you taken into account one at the implementation and trial stage, and then when you kind of move to that new technology, what is that interaction with the human being that changes? And don't forget, the human beings on your system, whether it be drivers, track workers or whatever, have often been working under the old system for quite some period of time. So it's not just a matter of stick them in front of a few slides to do training. How are you working with them to pick up what might be that
Sorry, everyone. It looks like we might have just temporarily lost Sue. We might just give her a moment to see if she comes back online. Sorry, Sue, I think, can you hear us okay?
I can hear you.
Okay, sorry, we just lost you for the last kind of 15, 20 seconds.
Hear me now?
Perfect, yeah, can hear you now, all good.
Sorry, you lost all my answer about human factors and new technology. I'll try to give a very quick summary. Absolutely, when we're looking at those new technologies being brought onto the system, some of the critical issues we look at are around that impact on the human being and how the human being interfaces with the new technology and what is changing as a result, and how is that human factors issue being managed, definitely.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, I've had a question come in around the in-cab cameras initiative. So it's really around how you're planning to address any of the sort of IR challenges that might be associated with the rollout of that initiative, and what your thoughts are in that space.
Yeah. Well, it's not, obviously my responsibility is to make a recommendation to ministers as to a safety issue. I'm hoping you can still hear me, Simon, because yes, it's starting to flash up a few little network issues. I'd switch over to my headphones, but I'm terrified of changing everything at the moment. So look, my job is to make that recommendation to ministers. And for me, it's a case of, for safety purposes, for the purpose of safety investigations. It's not for me to dictate how you then deal with some of the industrial issues that may relate. And certainly, the conversations that I've had, and I've had many with train drivers across Australia, I've had many conversations with the Rail, Tram and Bus Union and the AFULE. And can I say, you know, one of their biggest concerns isn't so much me as a regulator using it or others, it is misuse is their biggest concern. You know, and so look, any leader of an organisation, I say that as I'm a chief, I might be the national regulator, but I'm also the chief executive of an organisation. Is if you are going through change and things, whether it be things like in-cab cameras or anything else, you need to actually be trying to bring your staff along with you. Not so easy, but there has to be, if operators want to sort of use technologies, not just in-cab cameras, but others around this, there needs to be some kind of trust built up as to what are the safeguards to ensure it's not being misused, that somebody's not just trying to catch somebody out. So it's like anything in leadership and management, it is about having those conversations. But it's not, nor is it the role of the Rail Safety National Law to dictate to an organisation as to how to do their industrial space. There's a whole, you know, Fair Work Act and others that are associated with that. And around the consultation that's required under that legislation. I'm bound by that as well.
Yeah, of course. No, thank you for that. In your presentation, you mentioned the importance of operators looking at their SMSs, particularly in regards to some of those train driver incidents. I've had a question come in around whether there's been any work done in aligning SMSs with asset management systems, particularly that ISO 5000 standard. There's any work happening from in your space on that perspective?
Well, probably a key, well, it's not even just an alignment, a key part of a rail operator's safety management system, a key component will be asset management. And we will look at what are the standards that the operator following in relation to asset management, and that's that whole of life asset management as well. We'll even look at that when there's a new construction. You know, is it being constructed in a way that will make, you know, maintenance in 10 years' time such a problem that it's going to cause a safety issue? So it's not a case of there's an alignment. A key critical component of an organisation's safety management system is asset management and how they are managing the assets. And there's a lot of modern technology in that space as well around, you know, we've moved on from the day of, you know, you must maintain this particular part once a month because the book says so, as opposed to more of that sort of predictive maintenance on, you know, we've now got systems out there that can test how the componentry is actually operating so that you can, you know, do the maintenance as soon as you need to. But certainly one thing we will look at too is often it's the new shiny stuff that gets the focus. It is about continuing to maintain existing assets, and we often hear this term of, are they sweating assets? Now that's okay if you've kept them updated, replaced components that need to be replaced, etc. But asset management is an absolutely critical part of what we focus on with safety management systems.
Yeah, fantastic. So in your presentation, you also touched on railway-related fatalities, and I noticed over the last 2 years, we've fortunately seen a bit of a downward trend in that area as well across the network. Any sort of initial observations from yourself on what might have attributed to that slight downtrend, and whether you think there's any expectation we might see that continue in the years ahead?
Look, again, Simon, I think some of those statistics are impacted by COVID. Less movement on the system, less people out there on the network, either walking around it or on the system. So I think that's causing some of that downward trend. But I also, you know, want to say that the rail industry, you know, in my view, does work hard. You know, never would I sit and have a conversation where they don't care about safety. They do very much care about rail safety. How different organisations go about it will be different. And as I said, you know, my concern at times is that the safety management system is very well crafted, it's very well put together, but we'll often find, are you actually out there auditing to make sure your own people are following? Don't just rely on us to come in and audit. Where that sort of spot and check in and out, you need to be looking at your own organisation and are they actually following the safety management system? But like anything, you can get downward trends. And although we're seeing a bit of a downward trend in relation to rail-related fatalities, I look at it and say, but we have had a particularly bad couple of years where the industry has lost 4 train drivers that it shouldn't have lost, and you know, we haven't seen that for a period of time. So you know, I wouldn't like us to sort of feel too comfortable about the downward trend either.
Yeah, no, very good point. Now, look, we're shortly running out of time, so I might just kind of give you one last final question in our last couple of minutes. So I guess ONRSR's had a few big projects and initiatives that are coming to the pointy end of completion now with the data strategy and cost recovery and the in-cab video initiative. I guess what's on the horizon from your perspective for the regulator over the next 12 months or so that might be of interest to the industry to keep an eye out for?
Yeah, probably, although we feel like they're coming to an end, I think internally we're full steam ahead on things like, because that data strategy, our whole internal system needs to change. Look, one of the things I think will be the next big thing will be, and I touched on it before about that sharing of information. I'm hoping some organisations and governments are still very sensitive about the sharing of data. That's what I hope our next stage is. And what I see is the next stage, and it feeds on nicely from the level crossing portal and the data strategy, is what is the next version of our portal, which I'm hoping can be a much more interactive thing where industry, and this is when we talk about reducing regulatory burden, this is a big part of it, is that day-to-day administrative stuff. So that next phase of our portal and what kind of information and benchmarking, information can we share back with industry, governments, all of those decision makers? That's what I probably see as one of the next big things. The other thing, Simon, we've touched on it with some of the questions that you asked, is around the new technology in the industry. And I think the big push to make sure that these technologies are compatible or interoperable, that we stop being, it's no longer so much we're separate states in this space, it's separate operators in this space now. So let's make sure that we keep that interoperability as the National Rail Action Plan is working on.
Great. Look, thank you so much for your time today, Sue. We have had a plethora of questions. We haven't been able to get to them all, so we'll have to have you back at some stage in the future. And look, thank you to everyone on the line that's joined us today and engaged in that Q&A session. I'm sure you found it valuable as I did. We will be circulating a short feedback survey after the conclusion of the webinar today, so I'd encourage you to complete that at your leisure. Now, just a reminder that we do have some other webinars scheduled over the coming weeks on a variety of different topics. Our next webinar is on Wednesday, the 13th of October, which is next week. That one's titled Supporting the Rail Industry to Address Diversity, and we'll be fortunate enough to have that presented by Dr. Janin Brederhoft, who's the Executive Manager of Research and Analytics, as well as Elise Lane, who's the Senior Education Officer, and both of those people at the Workplace Gender Equality Agency. So encourage you to jump on the line for that one next week. So look, once again, thank you so much, Sue, for joining us this afternoon. It's been a fantastic session, and I'm sure everyone found that really informative and a valuable discussion there. And thank you for your open approach to engagement as always. And look, I think we'll leave it there. So thank you everyone on the line for joining us. Have a great afternoon, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Simon.